Welcome to Communicate to Lead, the podcast that empowers leaders and aspiring leaders to communicate with clarity and impact. I'm Kele Belton, CEO and successful entrepreneur, and your host for today. I'm here to equip you with all the essential tools and strategies to master effective communication and lead your team to success. As the founder and CEO of The Tailored Approach, my goal is to empower you to be the best leader you can be. So sit back, relax, and join me in today's episode as we dive into the art of communicating like a true leader. You are good at your job, and I mean that. You deliver, you hit your deadlines, your manager respects you, your colleagues count on you. And yet, when promotion conversations happen, when someone is being considered for a step up, your name is not the one that comes up first. And here's that part that makes it even harder to sit with. You suspect it's because you are remote. You can't prove it. No one has said it to your face, but you feel it. And not because your work is not good enough. Not because you are not ready, but because somewhere along the way, the people making decisions about your future started to see your remote status as a signal that you are happy where you are, that you are not quite ready for more, that you are a great individual contributor, but not quite leadership material. No one said it to you directly. No one needed to. You felt it in the meetings you were not invited to, in the opportunities that went to people who happened to be in the office, in the feedback that never quite addressed why you were being passed over, because no one wanted to say it's because you are not here. Here's what you need to know. Remote is not a career limitation. It is a communication and strategy problem. And those, my friend, are solvable. That is exactly what we are doing today. Welcome back to Communicate to Lead, the podcast where we talk about the communication and leadership strategies that help high-performing women get recognized, get promoted, and lead with confidence. If we are meeting for the first time, I'm Kele Belton, a communication and leadership facilitator, coach, and consultant. And if you've been here for a while, welcome back. I'm glad you are here with me today. We are talking about how to build visibility and advance your career when you aren't physically in the building where everything is happening. Because if you've been listening for the past several weeks, you know we wrapped a 4-part series on executive presence. We talked about how you show up visually, how your voice carries authority, and how the words you choose either build or undermine your leadership brand. And I kept getting a version of the same question from listeners and from clients. Kele, this is incredibly useful, but what does that look like when I'm working remotely? What does executive presence mean when half my meetings are on a screen? And some of my most important work happens over Slack and email? That is the question this episode answers. And I want to be upfront with you. We are not going to rehash the present series. If you haven't checked them out, feel free to click the links in the show notes to go directly to those episodes. Instead, we are going to go deeper and look at what's actually happening beneath the surface. And then I'm going to give you 3 specific strategies from what I call the remote visibility framework that will shift how decision makers perceive you without requiring you to be in the building you're not in. Before we get into today's episode, a quick favor. If this episode has helped you in any way, whether it gave you the words for a conversation you were dreading, helped you show up differently in a meeting, or make you feel less alone in the challenges of leading, would you take 60 seconds and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? Reviews are genuinely one of the most powerful ways to help other women find the show. When you leave a review, you are essentially saying, this podcast is worth your time. And that matters more than you might think. Thank you in advance. Okay, I want to tell you about a client I worked with last year. I'm going to call her Simone. Simone she is fully remote. She had been working for several years. She worked for a mid-sized organization in a senior individual contributor role, and by every measurable standard was excellent. Her projects came in on time, her quality was consistently high, her manager trusted her completely. Her colleagues sought her out when they were stuck or they needed some innovation and some creativity. And when she came to me, she was frustrated in a way I immediately recognized. It is the frustration of someone who has done everything right and still can't figure out why the door is not opening. She hasn't been promoted in 2 years. She has watched colleagues with less tenure move into leadership roles. She had a conversation with the manager about her career trajectory, and the feedback was encouraging but vague. She heard things like, keep doing what you're doing. You are such a strong contributor. We see your potential. But no path, no timelines, no specifics. When we started working together, one of the first things I asked her was, what do the people making promotion decisions actually know about how you think? Not what you produce, but how you think. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said, I'm not sure they know much. I send my work, I show up to my meetings, I do what I'm asked, but I don't really say anything about how I got there. That was the beginning of everything. What Simone was experiencing and what I hear from many remote leaders is not one problem. It's two problems that seem like one. The first is a visibility problem. Your work and your thinking are not consistently reaching the people who need to see them. Not because you are hiding, but because the natural channels that would have carried that visibility in an office, hallway conversations, being seen working late, the informal moment where your judgment gets noticed, those channels do not exist for you in the same way. You have to build new ones deliberately. The second is a perception problem. Remember, I said the first one is a visibility problem. The second one is all about perception. And this one is more subtle and honestly more damaging. When someone consistently chooses to work remotely, some decision makers, without even realizing it, begin to form a story. The story goes something like this. She seems happy where she is. She's not really pushing for more. She's a reliable contributor, but she's not signaling leadership ambition. No one puts it in those terms, by the way. It is rarely conscious, but it shapes decisions. And here's the critical thing. If you are not actively providing a different story, the assumption fills the silence. Most of the advice you will find about remote visibility focuses entirely on the first problem. Turn your camera on, speak up in meetings, send status updates. And that advice is not wrong, by the way, but it's incomplete because you can be perfectly visible and still be perceived as a contributor rather than a leader. The remote visibility framework addresses both. 3 strategies, each targeting a specific place where remote workers lose ground in the advancement conversation. Let's get into them. So here's the first strategy. In most conversations, individual contributors are rewarded for output. You deliver, your work is strong, you are valued. Leaders are rewarded for the decisions they make and the impact those decisions have. They are rewarded for being able to look at a situation, assess it clearly, make a call, and communicate that call in a way that brings others with them. That is a very different skill set from the one that produces excellent work. And the gap between those two things is exactly where remote workers tend to get stuck. Here's the challenge. When you are in an office, your thinking and decision-making are naturally on display. Someone catches you working through a problem at your desk. You make a comment in a hallway that reveals how you see a situation. You get pulled into an impromptu conversation, and your perspective is heard by someone who wasn't expecting it. That organic exposure to how you think and what you prioritize quietly builds a picture of you as a leader in other people's minds. When you are remote, that organic exposure doesn't happen. And if you aren't replacing it with something intentional, the picture never gets built. So the strategy is this. Stop letting your thinking be invisible. Make it a regular, deliberate part of how you communicate. What does that look like in practice, if you're wondering? Let me give you a few specific examples, because this is one of those shifts that sounds straightforward, but requires some translation into your actual work. When you send a completed project or recommendation, add 2 to 3 sentences of framing before the deliverable itself. Not a summary of what they can expect in the document, a window into how you got there. You could say something like, I considered 3 approaches here. I am recommending this one because it gives us the most flexibility as the timeline shifts. The trade-off is that it requires sign-off from 2 stakeholders rather than 1, which I have already flagged with both. That's not a long paragraph. It's 3 sentences, but those 3 sentences tell the reader that you are thinking strategically, that you are weighing trade-offs, that you are already anticipating the next question. That, my friend, is leadership communication. And it takes less than 2 minutes to write it. Here's something else. Remote workers often default to listening mode in meetings, especially in larger calls. And listening is valuable. But if you are in a meeting where a decision is being discussed and you have a perspective, share it. Not every thought needs to be shared, but if you have a concern, a recommendation, or a question that would sharpen the decision, say that. When you do, frame it as a leader would. Don't say, I think we should consider X. Instead, say, I want to flag something I'm seeing here. If we go in this direction, we will need to address Y before Q3. Here's what I would recommend. That framing, which names what you're seeing and then offers a recommendation, is exactly how senior leaders communicate. When you do that consistently, people start to hear you differently. Here's a final example. If your organization uses Slack, Teams, or any kind of asynchronous communication, those channels are an underused opportunity for remote leaders. A brief weekly message in your team channel that names one thing you are watching, one problem you are working through, or one question you are thinking about positions you as someone who is actively engaged and thinking at a broader level. You're not simply reporting on tasks, you are contributing to how the team thinks. Simone started doing this with a simple Friday message to her team. 3 sentences. What she finished that week, what she was thinking about heading into the next week, and one question she was sitting with. And within a month, a manager started referencing those messages in their one-on-ones. Not because they were perfectly crafted, but because they made her thinking visible in a way that it had never done before. Here's the second strategy. The hallway conversation is one of the most powerful and underestimated career tools in any organization. Not because of where it happens, but because of what it does. It creates low-stakes, relationship-building contact between you and people who influence your career outside of formal performance contexts. It builds familiarity, and familiarity builds trust, and trust is what promotion decisions are often built on. When you're remote, you lose the hallway by default, and most remote workers never replace it, not because they don't want to, but because it feels forced to recreate something that the office used to provide for free. So here's another way of seeing it. The hallway conversation was never really accidental. It was context dependent. The office provided the context. You had to provide the conversation. Remote work shifts the responsibility for context to you as well. Before I share the strategies, I want to acknowledge something first. For many women leaders in remote settings, reaching out to senior leaders can feel genuinely risky. It can feel presumptuous. It can feel like you are overstepping. And depending on your organization's culture, some of those instincts may be reading the room correctly. So I'm not going to give you a one-size-fits-all prescription here. What I'm going to give you is a range, and you can calibrate based on what's available to you. So here's the first option. If you have a manager you trust and a relationship with a skip-level leader who's approachable, a monthly 15-minute conversation, 15 conversation framed as a learning conversation, not a status update, not a pitch, can be genuinely powerful. You could say something like, I have been thinking about how our work connects to the broader strategy, and I would love 15 minutes to hear how you see it. Most senior leaders are willing to have that conversation with someone who frames it as curiosity rather than self-promotion. And those conversations do 2 things. 1, they give you insight, and 2, they give the other person a window into how you think. My client Simone eventually had a version of this conversation with her skip-level manager. She was nervous about asking. Don't get me wrong. She worried it would seem as though she was going around her direct manager. So we spent time on framing the ask and letting her manager know she was going to do it. So it felt transparent rather than political. The conversation itself was about 20 minutes, but it fundamentally changed how her skip-level manager saw her. Option 2, if direct outreach feels out of reach right now, look for existing structures and use them more strategically. If a senior leader runs an all-hands or a department meeting, come prepared with a thoughtful question. Not a question just to be seen asking one, but a genuine one that shows how you think about the work. If there's a cross-functional project or task, volunteer for it. Those environments put you in contact with people you would otherwise not interact with, in a context where your contribution is naturally visible. That's option 2. Here's option 3. Sometimes the lowest barrier way to replace the hallway is a well-placed written message. If a senior leader sends a company-wide communication about a strategic shift, and you have a genuine reaction to it, responding briefly and thoughtfully is a form of visibility, my friend. Not a performance, a genuine reply that says, I found this framing useful. It helped me see how my team's work connects to the larger picture. That is a real touch point. And it takes, 2 minutes? You can do this. So the principle across all 3 of these options is the same. You are building real, low-stakes relationship building contact with the people whose perception of you matters for your advancement. You are doing it consistently, and you are doing it in a way that lets them see how you think. That was all strategy 2. So here's strategy 3. And strategy 3 is really all about correcting any assumptions directly, because this is the strategy that most people skip, not because they don't know they should do it, but because it requires a kind of directness that can feel deeply uncomfortable, especially for women who have been taught that ambition is something you demonstrate quietly, not something you say out loud. The reality is that if people making decisions about your advancement have informed an assumption about your ambition, and you have not given them information that challenges it, that assumption will continue to shape their decisions. It is not enough to do good work and hope they notice. You have to be the one who gives them a better story. And I want to be precise about what I mean here, because I'm not talking about announcing your ambition in a way that feels like a performance or out of context. I'm talking about one clear, direct conversation with your manager in which you name your goals, ask what leadership looks like at the next level, and specifically ask what they need to see from you to support your advancement. That conversation sounds simple. It rarely feels that way, though. So let me walk you through what Simone did, because her version of this conversation was one of the most important moments in our work together. After several weeks of working on the first 2 strategies, Simone asked her manager to discuss her career path, not in their regular one-on-ones, in a separate conversation with that as the explicit agenda. She said, I want to talk about where I'm headed and what I need to do to get there. Can we set aside time for that specifically? Her manager said yes. And in that conversation, Simone said something I think is one of the most powerful things a remote leader can say. She said, I know that being remote can sometimes read as not being interested in more. I want to be clear that the opposite is true for me. I am absolutely committed to advancing here. And I want to make sure you have everything you need to advocate for me when those conversations happen. Her manager's response stopped her in her tracks. She said, I honestly did not realize you were looking to move up. I thought you were happy where you were. That's the assumption right there. There's no malice, no intentional oversight, simply a story that had formed in the silence and had never been questioned. That conversation changed my client's trajectory. Not immediately, not with a promotion in the following month. It took several months of consistent work across all 3 strategies before the promotion conversation became real. There were moments when even Simone wondered whether anything was actually shifting. But the first thing that changed was not her title, it was her inclusion. She started being invited into conversations earlier. She was asked for her perspective on decisions unrelated to her direct role, and her manager began naming her in meetings she had not been in. And the promotion came, but more importantly, the perception changed. And the perception is where it all begins. So let me bring the 3 strategies together for you before we close. The remote visibility framework is built on a simple, single premise. Advancing from a remote position is not a visibility problem alone. It is a visibility and perception problem. Both require deliberate strategic action. Strategy 1 is to make your thinking visible, not just your output. Get in the habit of sharing your reasoning, recommendations, and perspective across every communication channel available to you, including written messages, meetings, and async updates. Let people see how you think, not just what you produce. Strategy 2 is to replace the hallway with intention. Identify the senior stakeholders whose perception of you matters for advancement and build real, low-stakes, consistent contact with them. Use whatever form is available and appropriate to your organization, whether that is a direct conversation, strategic participation in existing meetings, or a well-placed written touchpoint. Strategy 3 is to correct the assumption directly. Have the conversation with your manager where you name your ambition, ask what advancement looks like, and give them what they need to advocate for you. Don't let the silence write your story. These 3 strategies work together. None of them alone is sufficient, but when you apply all 3 with consistency, something shifts. The people who matter start to see you differently, not because you have changed who you are, but because you stop leaving the narrative to chance. Here is your action step for this week. Identify which of the 3 strategies is the most urgent for you right now. Is it strategy 1? Is your thinking invisible because you are delivering work without explaining the reasoning behind it? Then this week, the next time you send a recommendation or a completed project, add 2 to 3 sentences that let the reader see how you got there. Or maybe it's strategy 2. Are you doing excellent work in isolation without consistent contact with the people whose perception of you matters? This week, identify one senior stakeholder you want to build a meaningful touch point with and take one step towards that, whether it's sending a message, asking for a brief conversation, or showing up more strategic in a meeting they lead. Or perhaps it's strategy 3. Is there an assumption in the silence that you have never corrected? This week, ask your manager for a dedicated conversation about your career path, not in the margins of your regular check-in, a real conversation with that as the agenda. One strategy, one step this week. That's where the shift begins. If today's episode resonated with you and you are ready to stop waiting for the right conditions to advance and start building a real strategy for your career, I invite you to book a leadership strategy call with me. It is 30 minutes, complimentary, and a real conversation about where you are and where you want to go. You can grab the link in the show notes. I would love to talk with you. Until next Monday, my friend, I am Kele. Remind you that great communication is the foundation of inspiring leadership. Keep learning, keep growing, and remember to communicate to lead.